All right, our project is EDI or DI, the Streamlined language of the supply chain, and I'm Davis Roach. This is Kate Seal and Nick Romley. What is EDI? It stands for Electronic Data Interchange, and it's pretty much a tool that the market uses, kind of a language to develop electronic supply chains and create highly coordinated virtual trading communities. It speeds up the process and saves everybody money. And EDI is not just used for contracting or for the sale of goods. It's used to automate entire industries, and it's a mission critical part of the companies in the supply chain and their supply chain management strategies. It helps link together all the companies in the supply chain. And as of 2003, 95% of Fortune 500 companies use EDI, and 80% of business transactions are conducted via EDI. And then EDI has evolved along with the marketplace. And in 1992, there's this kind of long definition: the process of computer to computer, business to business data transfer of repetitive business process involving direct routing of info from one computer to another without human interface according to predefined information formats and rules. It's long, it's a cumbersome definition. It still fits today, it still fits what EDI is, but EDI has evolved since then. And when we asked a partner from a law firm in Raleigh what EDI means to her and how she uses it in her everyday business, she said it's just the electronic transfer of information to her. It's almost the language of business. And she didn't define EDI in the context of the sale of goods or services, but it does work for that, and that's what we'll be focusing on. But it's used for so much more than that, and EDI continues to evolve in response to these new enterprises and industry requirements, and it's getting cheaper, it's getting more streamlined, and more cost efficient for all the parties that use it. And then the repetitive business processes in the 1992 definition that still apply, that our small business clients will mainly be dealing with, are purchase orders, credit approvals, invoices, shipping notices, and order confirmations, among a bunch of other things. And how does it work? So a user just enters data into an EDI system. It's a common system across all the trading partners, and the system automatically converts the data into the predetermined EDI format or language that we talked about. It's essentially just standardizing the data so that anybody that uses the same format can talk to all the other trading partners that use this system, and it helps shorten the messages down, reduces data entry errors from humans. It's more automated, and once again saves money. And this is excuse me. This is an example of a supply chain process without EDI. And here it's a purchase order, and you can see there's a person involved at every step. There's arrows going back and forth to each person along the way. There's tons of people. I mean, the only place you don't see a person is in the truck, but that's because he's driving. So, and here's what a supply chain will look like with EDI. There's the purchase order. There's just computer. Every step you see a computer practically, and the flash report on the right. Instant data to sales, inventory, manufacturing, engineering. That's all that data can be analyzed by those different sections of the business, and the small business client might be part of one of those, the inventory or manufacturing, and can analyze all these EDI messages and better streamline the process and save money. And also there's just arrows going, so you go in one direction, usually here, as opposed to back and forth, for the offer and acceptance of a contract. Here it's just one direction, and then things are automatic. It bounces back and saves time and saves money for everybody involved in the supply chain and small business client who's looking to adopt EDI. And here's an actual example of the EDI code. Normally it's in vertical form here, but normally it's just a string of numbers across with, at the end of each line you can see there's kind of a dash that's just splitting up, but we put it in vertical form for make it easier to read. And the first three lines of the code there are it's called the envelope of the EDI message. It's exactly what you would think of with an envelope in in a paper contract. It's where it's going, return address, sender, that type of thing. And then the last after the first three lines is the body of the message. And EDI there's codes that mean different things. And here you can see in the fourth line down, there's 8 810 in the middle there. That's the code for an invoice. So, if one trading partner sends this code to another, they know it's an invoice. They know it's like an invoice request. And here's an example of how these codes get transferred back and forth, and how our small business client will likely be involved in the supply chain, and how they'll use EDI. There's a request for quote sent, and an 840 like we were talking about, where the 810 was on the last slide with an invoice, quote, purchase order, and that's just kind of the process of how EDI messages are sent back and forth. And also where every time a message is sent back and forth, there's a thing called a functional acknowledgement. And that's just pretty much to ensure that the transmission was received. It helps in the event of a later dispute. It's just to functionally acknowledge that any message was sent. And this is an example of one. It's kind of tough to see here, but I was talked to Tom Scala, who's a supply chain EDI manager at Northrop Grumman, and he sent us what their functional acknowledgement and what their system looks like here, just a screenshot of his. And it's kind of tough to see here, but there's different ways you can send a functionally acknowledge. You're waiting for acknowledgement and acknowledgement overdue. So that's those little checkboxes there showing how there can be a problem, and how they bring up an issue of was a contract formed, or is just a potential problem in the EDI process, and that's how they can go investigate more. And you see there's a record for every one of these transactions. Every horizontal line across is a record of these functional acknowledgements. So what is EDI's role in the marketplace? And how does this affect our small business client who might be wanting to use EDI and get into these integrated supply chains? It's just an information management tool, once again a language used to speed up the movement of products through an integrated supply chain network. And why does the market use EDI? Why is it adopted and continued to evolve today? It's once again reduce costs, speed it up, helps everybody save costs, and for every trading partner that's using the same EDI format. So what is this integrated supply chain network I was just talking about? It's a group of independent companies that form a strategic alliance, the common goal of designing, manufacturing, and delivering right quality products to customer groups faster than other alliance groups and vertically integrated firms. So these are, there's always usually a top person in these integrated supply chains, like a Walmart. We looked at Walmart, Ace Hardware, Northrop Grumman, Winn-Dixie, just to name a few. And so if a small business client wants to get into these integrated supply chain networks, the top of the supply chain party usually will set the EDI standards. So a small business client has the opportunity to join these. Shouldn't be afraid of adopting EDI and contracting through it. It's there's issues to deal with, but it's essentially a language, and it'll save them money. They'll be able to increase their scales, and it'll be good for the long run of the business. So once again, why should why should our small business client care about these integrated supply chain networks? Once again, it saves them money, increases efficiencies for all the companies in the supply chain. If everybody in the supply chain, all the trading partners using the same EDI system save money, then it's passed on to our small business client. It's an advantage there for the small business client. And the movement of products through a supply chain. Here, EDI, these integrated supply chains should strive to use EDI throughout each of these processes. They forecast their final demand for products. Using these projections to plan production schedules and the suppliers about incoming orders. And EDI should be used to be transferring the messages through each of these steps. Next, suppliers plan and schedule the production runs and arrange for delivery of intermediate goods. And there's where our small business client could be involved there. And after production is complete, companies will manage the shipping process and tracking of the finished product through the distribution network to the end user, to the customer. And then finally, the companies in the supply chain, and they want to monitor their sales, see if their forecasts were right, tweak their forecasts so that inventories aren't sitting on the shelves and going bad, and there's not a shortage of products at the retail level. So everywhere, EDI should be used to transfer these data, the data back and forth for the movement of products through the supply chain, and then it can help in the forecasting process in the beginning. It helps the intermediate goods suppliers, and everywhere along the way. The more EDI, the more data you can analyze, and the better it'll be for the small business client that wants to get in, and for the company at the top of the supply chain. So another practical advantage of integrating EDI at every step. We were talking to Alicia Gillespie again at a firm in Raleigh, and she was saying the main practical benefit of EDI today is one of the main developments of it. This whole new industry is cropped up, is data mining. So if the whole supply chain is integrated, if it's all integrated, everyone's using the same EDI and these different supply chains, and an entire industry has data for these EDI messages, and the more steps that have EDI, the more data that is available for mining. And what can data mining do for our clients? What can it do for the whole process? There's endless possibilities. You can study the data, learn more about your customers, streamline the supply chain like we've been talking about, study the demographics. You can sell the data to in the healthcare industry, even they sell the data, but it can be sold for any of our the small business clients. You can analyze the data to better manage efficiencies. The more data you have, the more you can analyze it, and there's a whole industry that's cropped up over EDI. These whole companies just make algorithms to help analyze this data and better streamline the process. So, and here's another example. The large companies at the top are trying to integrate throughout the entire process. So that's why they're requiring our small business clients to use EDI. So it's not something to be afraid of. I mean, in this diagram, you see there's the supply chain management on the left, but it's really every step of the process, every step of the business should transfer data using EDI, because then there's more data available for data mining, and it helps streamline the process and make it cheaper for everybody. Not just supply chain, but every aspect of the business can transfer the data of everyday transactions, contracts, anything. So how does this affect our small business client again? We talked about at the top of the supply chain, these companies like the Walmart, the Northrop Grumman, Ace Hardware, are requiring the smaller companies to contract with them through their standard form EDI, and that's what allows these whole integrated supply chains to develop, because everybody's talking the same language, and it leads to lower costs and increased efficiencies once again. And the money saved by the larger company can save the entire supply chain company, including our small business client who's asking us about EDI and adopting it. So what are some specific advantages for our small business client instead of advantages for the whole supply chain? They'll likely use it for the buying and selling of goods, goods and services related to that, and here's where the price quotes come in, the purchase orders, credit approvals, things like that will be transferred, that they'll likely transfer back and forth using EDI. Another guaranteeing payment with letters of credit, and directing a third party, like a warehouse, to release goods, and this can all be done kind of immediately. You get an EDI message, and it can go straight to the manufacturing table. And even with regulatory filings, EDI is used now, and there's a whole set of laws we won't even touch on with that, with HIPAA and stuff like that. But for our small business client, it's the buying and selling of goods, and mainly the price quotes and things like that they'll be worried about. And EDI can help reduce their data entry errors. Remember the slide at the beginning with the without EDI versus with EDI. There's far less people when EDI is involved, so less human error. Minimize paper use. I mean, it's keeping the company green, and it saves money too. Information in electronic form, it's more easily shared over just the small business client organization. It's they can better improve their process to be a better supplier for the whole supply chain, improved inventory management, and just you can use these EDI messages immediately after they're received without even human interaction sometimes. So there's tons of advantages there, but there are some downsides. Traditionally, EDI has required an expensive initial investment, and this is there is still an initial investment, but it's gone down. The Walmarts and Northrop Grummans invested a long time ago in these van networks, and they're trying to get their money's worth out of them. So sometimes they're still requiring the small business client to adopt these, and small business client can outsource this, can outsource the technology, and that save costs. But now these van networks, they're private networks, they're very secure, but now EDI is shifting to internet-based EDI. So each trading partner doesn't have to invest in these VAN networks, the servers, all the expensive equipment to contract through EDI. It's moving towards internet-based EDI, and the third-party service providers are starting to use this too. So really, it's adopting EDI is being cut by almost 50% now, and it's continuing to go down as more and more supply chains are using internet-based EDI instead of these private VAN networks. So there is still an initial investment, but it's not as big as it used to be. And once again, another kind of downside that Ms. Gillespie talked about was she was warning the lawyer who's helping these small business clients to have to rein in the business employees on the side of their client from, they're always trying to push profits, speed up the process, and she's constantly worried about EDI cutting legal corners and saving money. So here, as a lawyer for these small business clients who want to adopt, you really need to get to know your client's business, get to know their relationships, their business relationships with others in the supply chain, and throughout that the small business client itself, to protect these relationships and make sure they're not cutting the legal corners just to push profits. I mean, yes, this is fast, but you want to make it too fast to open the company up to liabilities by, say, not forming a contract and risk of the data not being properly protected. Make sure the system's properly integrated before it's used. So here's some common legal issues that may arise for the small business client who are adopting EDI. Various offer and acceptance rules, with authorization, authentication of these EDI messages. You want to protect against rogue EDI traders in the process. It's somebody in the company mistakenly or on purpose sends an order for 10,000 widgets. You want to make sure that only certain people with the authority can send these EDI messages, and propriety of paperless communication. And there's just some issues here. The statute of frauds. Are these electronic things, transmissions? Is there a signature? Is there a writing? And the competency and sufficiency of the evidence. What's the original document? How are you going to get this evidence into court in the event of a dispute? Legal and regulative record retention issues. There's usually an audit process. That's one thing you need for the actual EDI system. You want to make sure the data is stored securely, keep a record of it in the event of a dispute. And then these ownership and liability. What if you're outsourcing it to a third-party service provider? Who has the risk here? Is the risk transferred to the third-party service provider, our small business client, somebody else in the supply chain? Where's the risk, pretty much? Who has the risk? And then just the risk of transmission itself. There's always, what if there's a service outage? What if there's garbled messages, which is just the code, the actual code that we showed you in the beginning? What if it's just completely messed up, completely garbled? How do you deal with these issues? So none of these legal issues should scare off the potential client from adopting EDI. They just need to be thought out, and that's where we as the lawyer come into play. These issues need to be just acknowledged and accounted for. And how do you do that? Implement a trading partner agreement to try to manage these risks is one way that Kate will be talking about here in a second.
So as Davis explained, EDI really is a business tool that's used by entire supply chains to speed up the process, save costs, and the main legal aspects of EDI come in the trading partner agreement. So what exactly is a trading partner agreement? It is one of, if not the key document in the successful implementation of the EDI relationship. It's basically the contract. It's a legally binding agreement, sets forth the rights and obligations of the EDI trading partners. It outlines all the conditions that will allow them to communicate solely via electronic means as opposed to traditional paper contracting. It's the main way of ensuring that these EDI transmissions are both secure and efficient. It prescribes the general procedures and policies to be followed when EDI is used for transmitting and receiving this business information electronically. And ultimately basically states that the parties intend to operate in the same manner as though they were contracting with hard copy paper documents. and address any legal issues that might arise from the fact that they are solely using electronic communication. So as Davis mentioned, we really focused on a small business client, and when a small business client wants to get into an EDI supply chain and how they would basically set up their transactions with a larger company in order to accomplish that. And the bigger companies, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Lowe's Hardware, Ace Hardware, Northrop Grumman, all of these companies will have a standard form TPA. They use it for all of their trading partners regardless of the type of product that they're going to be contracting about. So the small business client is going to run into a situation where there's little to no negotiation on the actual terms of the TPA. It'll be a take it or leave it basis. If you want to contract with Walmart, you're going to have to take Walmart's TPA as it is. So it's really important for the small business client who's starting an EDI relationship to understand these TPA provisions, what they mean in the legal context. And so in 1994, the ABA actually created a model EDI trading partner agreement. And even though that was 17 years ago, very few businesses have strayed from the language and the provisions that the ABA put out at that point. That's basically the standard that you'll find in all of the big companies. And so what we did, you have a packet of information that has majority of the provisions that we pulled from the ABA and kind of changed some wording according to how some large businesses use them. But we're going to go over some of the main ones that really do have legal ramifications for electronic contracting in this way. So the beginning of the TPA starts with what's called the recitals. And the recitals basically set forth the mutual intention of the parties for valid and enforceable obligations to result from the electronic communication of data in substitution for these conventional paper documents. This is basically the provision in TPA that addresses UCC 2-204, the formation of a contract in general. And basically just says that even though it's electronic, this is still going to be in contract in every way under the UCC. This next section deals with documents and standards. And there's a couple phrases that I want to draw your attention to. The first is transaction sets. I believe you'll find it on the third line down. And the term transaction sets defines the types of data which specified transmissions must contain and the format in which that data must appear. And these are the things that Davis talked about, the purchase orders, the purchase order acknowledgments, the invoice requests. These are all of the documents that in a normal trading partner relationship would be exchanged in a hard copy form, but instead they've been assigned a code. And the code are these standards. The 810 for the invoice request, 997 for functional acknowledgement. And it basically is set across the board regardless of the type of trading partner arrangement that these codes will represent these things. And these essentially are just the language of EDI. Section 1.2 deals with third-party service providers. And the first important section in this is where it says that each party shall be responsible for the cost of any provider with which it contracts. And this element is basically consistent with an ordinary paper contract trading partner arrangement in which each party absorbs its own personal communication costs, the cost of couriers and postage and things like that. This provides for the same arrangement just in the electronic sense. The next provision that's important is the last two lines where it starts with each party shall be liable to the other for acts or omissions of its provider. This is a very important provision because it provides a clear rule for allocating the risk of loss between the parties arising from service provider contact. It basically just outlines that if company A's service provider is down for a certain amount of time and because of that they're unable to receive a transmission from company B, that this makes it very clear that company A will be entirely responsible for any damages, any liabilities that arise from their third-party service provider being out for that point in time. This next section deals with system operations. And this basically imposes a reciprocal obligation upon the parties to support effective and reliable communications and allocates the related costs for this. And one thing that we found that a lot of large companies are beginning to do with regards to this provision is actually include a specific number for the amount of time that a trading partner system must be up and operating. So for example, they'll set in their trading partner agreement that each party's system will be up and running and able to receive messages, say 95% of the time. And then that way there's a very strict benchmark by which they can assess any sort of damages If they can show that this party's system was only able to receive messages 93% of the time during a given month, it's a very clear standard for how they'll assess. Security procedures. Davis kind of touched on this a little bit, but adequate security procedures are recognized by general industry practice as absolutely critical to the efficacy of EDI communication. And this section basically says that each party has an affirmative duty to use security procedures to ensure that both the reliability of the communications that they're sent and enhance their ability to prove the substantive content of the underlying commercial transactions. And if either party fails to comply with the security procedure requirement, it may be liable for unauthorized transmissions and any consequences thereof, as well as may actually be stopped from introducing any of its records in the event that a dispute comes up. Since there's no way of proving that there were secure transactions, they'll actually go with the other party's records for anything in litigation. Their security procedures used in an EDI setting are far-ranging. The sophistication and detail of the security procedures used really depend on the individual parties involved in it. But the most common ones are going to be the confidential exchange of signatures, the exchange of encryption keys, actually physically controlling access to these transmission portals, and exchanging identifying information regarding which terminals within a company are authorized to send EDI messages. The signature provision, UCC 1-20139, defines sign to include any symbol executed or adopted by a party with present intention to authenticate a writing. And use of a signature is just as important in an EDI setting as it is in a paper contracting setting. And this section requires that each party adopt a signature, but it retains considerable flexibility about what symbols or codes will be used to make up that signature. And in a typical trading partner agreement, the signature that each party will use isn't actually going to be placed anywhere in the agreement, because the common practice is to consistently change these in order to protect the security of the system. Sorry. Proper receipt. Paper-based contracting, as we all know, relies on the mailbox rule, but in an EDI setting, it's illogical to say that the mere dispatch of a message is what makes it effective. So this provision actually does away with the mailbox rule and replaces it with the rule that a document isn't considered received until it is actually accessible by the receiving party. The document doesn't actually have to be examined in order to qualify as received, it just has to be at the location and able to be opened. So this is also similar to a paper contracting setting in which a letter will arrive at a business and it's considered received, but it's not actually opened until in the hands of the proper person. The acceptance provision, this reflects a straightforward contract principle that no obligation is going to arise until there's been a proper offer and acceptance relationship between the parties. Transmissions. Again, Davis kind of touched on garbled transmissions and what they are. And in the situation where Company A receives a document that it knows or has reason to know is incorrect, the law of mistake from traditional contract principles, UCC 1-103, still controls. And this provision isn't intended to displace the law of mistake. This deals with a different type of situation in which the form of the EDI code or the entirety of the EDI message is scrambled to the point where it's unrecognizable. And in that type of situation, the receiving party has the burden to notify the sending party that there's been a garbled transmission. And if the receiving party fails to do that, then the sending party's message, which is going to be in perfect form, is the one that will control in the event of a dispute. Terms and conditions provision. It's a long section, but it basically just recognizes that the exchange of documents furthers the commercial relationship of the parties, and the use of available technology pursuant to these terms doesn't create any conflict with any other written agreements between the parties. Within that provision, it talks about terms and conditions that will be negotiated. And this generally refers to the more traditional sales issues such as warranty, delivery, rejection, liability for non-conforming goods, and attorney's fees, things like that. All of those terms will actually be included in the appendix, which is where the parties have a little more say in what they want to include. There'll be the standard form TPA, and the appendix is where they put in provisions that are more applicable to their individual relationship. the validity and enforceability section, I'm going to draw your attention to section 3.2.2. And the UCC definition of writing, which is found in 1-20146, defines writing to include printing, typewriting, or any other intentional reduction to tangible form. 3.2.2 basically expands upon that and says that EDI transmissions will qualify as a writing under the UCC definition, and also establishes that the EDI documents entered into under this agreement and pursuant to 3.2.2 will also satisfy the statute of frauds. Section 3.2.3 is in line with the UCC provision 2-208, which contemplates that the conduct of the parties pursuant to the agreement constitutes both a course of dealing and a course of performance that can be considered in determining both the meaning of the agreement and any accompanying contracts for the sale of goods that arise pursuant to this agreement. The severability clause, as I mentioned earlier, the large companies will have a standard form TPA that they'll use for all of their trading partners. And so the severability clause is important in the situation where some provisions of that TPA may not be especially applicable to one certain trading partner. And so this just basically assures that the entire contract doesn't fail in the event that any specific provision is found to be unenforceable under the particular circumstances. This is basically just an integration clause. It says that it integrates the appendix with the agreement into a complete agreement. And this provision also recognizes that the TPA itself doesn't create any sort of obligations relating to the sale and purchase of goods. This basically just creates that kind of underlying legal relationship between the parties and allows the parties to create later contracts for the sale and purchase of goods. And this section also precludes any later modifications or waivers as contemplated by UCC 2-209. This last section deals with limitation of damages, and the damages referred to here don't deal with the breach of any transaction by a party. It just deals with issues that come from message transmission problems. So if one party breaches with regard to the amount of an item shipped or proper rejection, this wouldn't concern that type of situation. This is just dealing with message transmission issues and damages that arise solely from that. So again, there's the full TPA in your handout, and you'll see at the end there's the appendix, and we've included some of the provisions that'll be in a typical appendix. It's not necessarily as long as a normal appendix would be, but we didn't really go into a lot of detail about the appendix provisions because those are straight normal contract principles, normal sales principles. Warranties don't operate any differently in an EDI setting, or the principles of rejection don't operate any differently in an EDI setting. The difference really comes in the way that they're transmitted. If you make a warranty claim, it'll be through an EDI code, but functionally they still operate the same.
All right, good afternoon. So, as you all know, we're treating this as a CLE, which is a continuing legal education, and you all are taking the role as attorneys in a small firm, and a client has come to you, so you want to understand how you're going to bring value to your client. On the other side of the building here, the business school, they're always concentrating and focusing on, how is this going to create value? How are we going to make our company more lean? How are we going to make this be practical for our clients, because our clients are paying us money to in turn save them money and make them more profitable. Furthermore, something that we have to keep in mind as to why this is all important and why this is very practical is when you're talking about something that is a company that's producing a product, this is what we call through economic geography, that one job will be, or when you have one main supplier, they will create 5 jobs that will reverberate due to supply. Therefore, a supply chain can be incredibly critical that it runs smooth and runs efficiently, because if we're not making money for our client, if we're not providing value for our client, it's not going to really be worth anything to him. So let's jump right in and take a look at the hypothetical that we've got here. We represent a company called Whirl Steel, and what Whirl Steel does is they provide steel parts to furniture companies. So if we were in one of the classrooms, you'd see that the little steel footies at the bottom of your chairs, those steel stampings go in them. If you've got steel hinges on doors, if you've got steel legs on the chairs, Whirl Steel, our client, provides all the different steel that these furniture companies will need to make any order that comes through for them. So, as you'll see over here, our client has just started out and they've received a few clients, very small, but they're just starting out. And the client will call them up and say, we've got a made-to-order contract. We need, just for today, or by the end of this week, we're putting in one order for 6 40-ton grade IXX steel coils. And they need to be at our factory by the end of the week. So, what happens? All right. By the way, before I forget, I'm sorry, that was the full thing we'll be going through step by step with you, so I don't want to create any confusion. What you'll see here is the Sales and Order Management Department at World Steel will receive the purchase order through the communication that's been set through EDI. Now, if you recall, there is the screenshot that David showed you earlier that shows the list of all the transactions, or the transmissions. This is the start of that. And there's going to be a record for every transmission that goes through. So when there is a problem, if there is, we can go back, we can look at the records and transmissions that have taken place, and then furthermore, we can look to the TPA, we can look to the pre-existing agreements that we had, and then we can figure out how this can possibly be rectified, what can be done to make things, as I mentioned before, as lean and as profitable as possible, because the more people you have in the supply chain, the more times and instances you can lose money. So, as I mentioned, the purchase order is put through from a company by the name of Nichols Furniture. Nichols Furniture sends it over to World Steel. World Steel sends back an acknowledgement order that they have received the document, not the documentation, but the EDI transmission. Then the next step, we go down to one more. The shipping department at World Steel will notify Nichols Furniture that they have identified and are ready to ship the steel coils that are in their facility. So they will not only do that, but they will also again send the acknowledgement form. Now we go down one more. It's the next day. It's Tuesday. The steel is to be there by Friday. World sends out the shipping order notices and all the order confirmations that, hey, your steel's coming, it's on the truck, you need it by Friday, but guess what, you're going to have it by Tuesday afternoon. Invoices will end up going back and forth once they're received, when they're in transmission. So let's say that you're Nichols Furniture, and Nichols Furniture's got a client that was a great client of theirs. They don't want to lose that client. They represent potentially a very big account years down the road. Well, that client calls them up and says, something happened. We need to have that furniture a lot sooner than we anticipated. How soon do you guys anticipate to have? Well, the person in their accounts payable department, their client services department, can immediately look up and say, well, the last thing we're waiting on is that steel. It's already on the truck, and our factory's in North Carolina, High Point. The steel's in Winston-Salem. It'll be here soon. You're going to have your furniture right away, and then Nichols Furniture, who's our client, can then retain their client, keep us and them in business. Next slide, please. All right, now, as we mentioned earlier through EDI and TPA, we were very fortunate in order to talk to a numerous group of really, really top-notch experts in their field. And one of the best and really, really helpful was Mr. Tom Scala out of Northrop Grumman. He provided us with a great number of flow charts. And when we looked at it, it took us a while to kind of understand it because there's 11 different pages to all of these, and they're all attached in your packets there. And what you'll actually end up noticing is that in reality, they come out to be a full sales outline to an extent. So now with what I explained to you before, that's when everything goes according to plan. There's nothing that goes wrong. But as we all know in reality, that is rarely, if ever, the case. Something gets held up, something doesn't go right. So what happens then if you're someone like a Northrop Grumman with a very large supply chain and something goes wrong? Okay, so we start at the very top up there, and as you can see, I'm so tall, but I just can't quite reach the very top of the supply chain over there. They're going to start, they receive the material, but the material gets to Northrop Grumman, and what do you know, does the material need to be returned? Well, in this instance, no, the material doesn't need to be returned, but as you can see, you've got two options. There's a yes and a no. The material doesn't need to be returned, so that brings us down here. Well, has the material been damaged is the next question that we're going to ask. Yes or no? Okay, this material has been damaged. Let's say it was supposed to be grade IXX steel, but that grade IXX steel doesn't hold up well to the elements. It's raining outside today. In the transportation, those elements affected the steel and then warped it. As a result of the warp, the steel can't hold up for what it needs to do. So we need to now codify the damage because we need to understand, is this steel going to go back to the supplier? Is this steel going to stay here with Northrop Grumman? Can they turn around and use it for something else? Because if you're shipping stuff back and forth, you're losing money and your client's losing value. So we're going to codify the damage on a major to minor scale. Then we're going to hold it for inspection. Okay, once we've held for inspection, what's the status going to be? Is it going to be a hold for inspection due to we have to have someone else come in a different department to quantify what's going on, what's actually happening, or do we not need to do it and it's ready to be shipped back, it's in process, or it needs to be reprocessed and reconstituted for something else? And all of these various options throughout the whole flow chart, as you'll see, correspond to a certain number, which would then be in all of your transmissions going back and forth. So when that customer of Northrop Grumman or Nichols Furniture says, where's my stuff? I need it today because my client needs something. Well, we can tell you exactly where it's at. Now, let's say that we're going to hold for inspection. So that brings us down here after we're going to still hold in the factory. Brings us down here. Then we're going to generate the manual receipt transmission so that all parties in the entire supply chain know exactly where everything is at, where their potential responsibilities can lie, how it's going to affect, how the TPA will be affecting, and pre-existing agreements will affect where we're at. Next slide, please. All right, so we've decided that it's going to be shipping back. We go to the very top again. This is the second page of your packets, by the way. And as you'll notice, the flow chart will move one to the next. Now, if there's a different scenario, depending on where we're at in the packet, it might take us to not page 2 of the flow chart. It might take us to page 6 or 7. So you can get an idea as to how vast this actually is. Every single type of potential possibility has been considered. So when the steel goes back, you need to say, well, is it still the same weight? Is it still, how was it damaged when it comes back to the steel manufacturer? So they're going to take the steel, they're going to weigh it at the scale here. Same, plus or minus, yes or no? Yes. And the scale weight. What's the status? Are we going to reconstitute it? Yes or no? Is it going to go back? Do we have to damage it? If it goes back, can we sell it to someone else? What do we do? This is what this provides us and provides our clients ultimately. We need to make our clients, especially in this economy, as much money as possible, and by running around in circle chasing your tail, it's not going to work. So EDI can absolutely greatly, basically provide quite a great deal of profitability for any company, large, small, and in between. So as you can see, not only does EDI affect the profitability of a company, it's very much related to sales law. The TPAs and EDIs will absolutely set up the entire contract the way that we need it to be done, so there's not any loss of profits. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. I hope you learned a lot, and we learned a lot as well in this presentation. Thank you very much.